this afternoon's or this morning's webinar, depending on where you are. Again, my name is Kevin Besnoy. I'm thrilled that everybody is here, and I think that we have a lot of great things to share and talk about today. It's always nice to have the opportunity to meet with parents, even in this type of medium, because I find that as a teacher in my classroom experiences, what I always know is that the parents who are involved typically don't need to be, and the parents who aren't involved typically do need to be. And what that really means is when we have home support at school and when there's a strong teacher-to-parent collaboration, it's really a wonderful avenue to ensure that the child is excelling and doing the absolute best that he or she can. So today what we're going to talk about is advocacy and how to communicate effectively with your child's teacher. And it's really important that as we get started that you think about what are the needs of my child, what is it that I really want to help the teacher to understand about my child, but also you need to make sure that you do that in an effective way, because the surest way to make things more difficult in your advocacy process is to convey unintended messages to teachers. And so we're going to talk about how to be an advocate in an effective and a team member way. So first, let's talk about advocacy. What is advocacy, and what are the different roles that you can take? So when we talk about advocacy in an education sense, what we really are talking about is the ability to, or the act of speaking up and helping the school system to understand that your child has needs and that there are certain things that school system can do to make sure that your child's needs are being met. Now, when you advocate for your children, one of the things that we have to make sure happens, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, is that we are teaching our children how to be self-advocates. Because at some point, they are going to leave home. For some of you, you're going to be really thrilled that they are, and others, you might not be as happy, but one day we all expect our children to grow up and become independent members of society. And we know that through their educational journey that they are working towards being independent and developing the skills to speak up for themselves. So as we advocate, as we speak out for our children and help our children acquire the special resources that they need, we want to make sure that we model that in a way that's effective, that's engaging, that at the same time is, I don't know if forceful is the right word, but it's done in a way where the child knows how to speak up for him or herself in a way that's going to receive services, but still doesn't turn people off, doesn't alienate the educational professionals that work with your child. So we must be advocates. Parents must be their own child's advocates. The school system and teachers, they love your children. They do, and they want to support your child. It's difficult sometimes when you have a classroom of 15 to 25 students in your room to make sure that everybody's needs are being met. And so it's important that you are in your child's corner. It's important that your child knows that if he or she has an issue at school, that he or she can come to you and that you will support them and show your child how to connect with the school system, whether it's at the classroom level or higher up, in a way that enables them to make sure that they are receiving the needs and the resources that they need. So it's important that you realize that in some ways you are your child's only advocate. So what we want to do is make sure that we're communicating these ideas effectively with your child's school. So let's talk about some do's that you want to do, that you want to implement at home and initiate this with your child. So what we call these are do principles for success. And I want to make sure that we give the proper thanks here to Kathleen Niles for helping to put together a lot of these resources and this information. The NAGC parent group is wonderful, and they have a tremendous amount of resources. So, Kathleen, thank you for many of the information that we're speaking from today. So the DO principles for success, we do want to set these realistic goals for your child. And it's always important, in my experience, is that we teach students, or we teach our children, goal setting. Teach them to set realistic goals, but also teach them to set goals that maybe might seem to be a little out of reach. But it's not just the goal setting that's important. Once they set the goals, we need to make sure that we show our children the individual steps that they need to take in order to achieve those goals. Doing that allows the child to self-assess how they are doing in achieving those goals, and allows them, as they get older, to start to set some more realistic goals, but not just setting the goals, being more realistic in what they actually have to do to accomplish those goals. Because whether a child has an IEP and is twice exceptional, or the child is gifted and has no disability, whatever the child's education program is, that child has to take ownership over it. The child has to be invested in the process. And by setting goals and teaching them how to achieve those goals, what you're able to do is to empower the child at an early age and teach your child how to be able to work through their educational obstacles that they're all going to have at some point, but work through those educational obstacles to achieve everything that they want to achieve. When you have issues or concerns about your child's educational process, or the child brings those issues to you, you initially want to start with the teacher. It's like anything else in the world and in the professional world, is where we want to start initially where the issue or the obstacle is taking place, and start with that person, because many times that person can rectify the situation, or we can together build a team approach. And so by communicating directly with the teacher when you hear or when you notice that an issue is taking place, it gives a couple of things. First, it acknowledges to the teacher that that teacher is a professional, and that that teacher is being given the opportunity to collaborate with you and the child. Second, it allows you to begin to document in case things don't go right. It allows you to document as you move up the chain of command that you have made attempts to work at the level where the problem is taking place. Because if you immediately go to the principal, most of the time the principal is going to say to you, have you communicated this with the teacher? Especially if you go up to the superintendent of the school system, that superintendent most definitely is going to say, have you communicated this at the classroom level? But as you begin to advocate and as you begin to communicate with the teacher and everybody else, you want to document. You want to document everything. But not just document the complaints or the letters that you send. I find that when you're creating what we'll talk about as a learner profile, that when you're creating a learner profile, you need to, in a sense, keep a home portfolio of things of work samples that your child has done. Work samples that your child has done exceptionally well, and work samples where your child has struggled. What that will allow you to do is to be able to go in and meet with the teacher and be able to present to the teacher not just what's going on in the classroom that particular year, but to provide a longitudinal look at where some of the successes and perhaps some of the struggles have been taking place, and see if y'all can document some strategies or some services that can be provided that will allow a more cohesive, more coherent and concise advocacy plan. And Kathleen asks a wonderful question here, where she's asking, at what age do you recommend children self-advocating versus having parents pave the way or contact the teacher directly? That's a difficult question to ask to give a specific age, and I think it depends on the type of services that you're asking for. So, for instance, I personally believe that when an IEP is being discussed, at the earliest age, that child should at least be in the room when he or she are having educational decisions made about him. For instance, with my son who received speech services, at the very first eligibility meeting, we had him attend. We didn't have him speak up for himself there, but we did have him hear the process. We did have him hear the things that the teachers and the speech pathologists were saying about him, and then also we wanted him to hear how his mother and I were speaking about the wonderful things that he does, but also some of the struggles that he has. So when exactly the child should start speaking up, I don't have an exact age, but I do know that when you are going through the process, you definitely want to have the child present through the modeling so that the child can see how you communicate in an effective way through that process. Now, if it's an issue in high school where where there's a sort of a disagreement over a test grade, I think that would be appropriate to consult with your child, and then have the child go and individually meet with the teacher and see the kind of results from there. But if it's something much more severe, then you would have to be able to step in. So, an exact age is hard to kind of pin down, but what we do want to know, and what we have to realize is that at the end of high school, that child is transitioning to college. And that child has to be able to go to college with the skill set to be able to advocate for him or herself. Mom and dad are not going to walk on that college campus most of the time and advocate for that child. College campuses, for the most part, don't want the parents on campus advocating for his or her child. They want that child to advocate for him or herself. So we maybe instead of saying what age should it start, we need to think about what are the skill set where that child has to have the self-advocacy skills in place to be able to transition to the next step or the next part of life. And that stage is at the end of high school. By that time, that child has to be able to enter a post-secondary setting with the ability to be a full, independent self-advocate. And so however you build that in up to that point, it's sort of like our goal setting that we talked about when we first put on that on this particular slide. That's the goal for us. Now, what are the steps, knowing your individual child, you need to build so that your child can get to that particular phase? I hope that answered your question, Kathleen. So what we want to now start talking about is advocating for your child, and how do we set realistic goals? So one of the things that we need to do is we need to build a learner profile. We talked about this just briefly a little bit before, but when we're building a learner profile, it helps us to articulate to parents who our child is, not just academically, but socially, how they think intellectually, how they act creatively. And so what we want to first talk about is, what are my child's strengths? And you can see there's a parent questionnaire that we've provided that asks you to sort of individually write down the answers to these questions that you see in front of you, so that you're able to speak from these. In a sense, it's almost like speaking points when you're writing a senator or something, but they're talking points that you want to be able to talk about with the teacher and about your child. And so you can see here, what are your child's positive strengths? But then also you need to be realistic, is where does your child struggle? And the reason why we talked about strengths first, there are a couple of reasons. First, we should always come from a strengths-based approach. And whenever you're meeting with a teacher or people about your child, that's where you want to start, and that's where we expect professionals and teachers to start when they're speaking with you and meeting with you, are the wonderful things that your child does. We all have strengths. We're all working hard. And where are the areas that the child is performing well? And we also want to talk about the positive aspects of the child's learning environment. Teachers work hard. They spend a lot of time not in school thinking about their learning environment, picking up things at the grocery store. There's so many teachers who will be at the grocery store and will see a watermelon and say, oh, my God, I can use this watermelon for my class to facilitate this particular lesson that I'm trying to create. So they're always thinking about how to create a more positive, rich learning environment. So what you want to do is you want to acknowledge that. You want to be able to talk about, these are the great things that are in this learning environment that will allow, that are allowing my child to learn. But at the same time, if you're having to communicate with a teacher about your child, a lot of times, more or less, you are, or your child has expressed that he or she is struggling, or you notice struggles. And it's okay to say, hey, even though these wonderful things are happening in your classroom, my child is struggling with these certain academic or social skills. Go ahead and by answering the questions on this parent questionnaire, you're able to articulate those in a sort of in a coherent, concise manner. It also allows you to talk about the obstacles that might be in place in the classroom, whether it's your child sitting at the front of the classroom and he needs to be at the back, or vice versa. It could be, some teachers like to play music to soften the mood, and that's really their pedagogical intent. But that might distract your child. So you need to be able to describe what's going on in the learning environment that is obstructing your child's learning. Now, you also want to be able to talk about what is an ideal day for your school, for your child, in a sense of how does your child learn, what is the most engaging, because what we know about learning environment and classroom instruction is that when it's provided in a meaningful and engaging way, the child is having fun. When children are engaged at their intellectual ability, time seems to melt away. And the school day is an enriching place, it's an exciting place, and your child will come home excited to talk about the things that they learned about. So you want this, you want to make sure that you're talking about an ideal day for your child. You also want to be able to describe what you want your child's life to be like 25 years from now. And I think that this is an important part of sort of laying out your child's learner profile, because it goes back to that goal setting that we talked about a couple of slides ago, where you're setting goals for your child and your child's setting goals, and this has just been part of the steps that your child will go through to achieve those goals. But as part of the self-advocacy process, we want to make sure that your child can articulate the exact same information. And so whether the child is old enough to formally sit down by him or herself and answer this information, or you sit down with a younger child and ask the child these things to be able to help him or her articulate this information. Now, for younger children, I think it might be more difficult to articulate some of the specifics of this, but you should be able to help your child translate their ideas into information that can be shared with the teacher. And also, I don't know necessarily for younger children where we ask the child, or where you ask or think about to describe what you want your child's life to be like 25 years from now. For a 6-year-old, that's just a really impossible question to answer. But what you can ask them is, what do you want your life to be like when you grow up? What do you want your life to be like in the future? I think it's best to ask children what they want their life to be like instead of asking them what they want to do when they grow up. What they want their life to be like can then influence what they do. But it's hard to say, oh, I want to be a doctor when you're 5 years old. That's just, you're not quite sure exactly what that means. So I think it's good to make sure that you are working with your child to help him or her create their own learner profile so that you're able to connect with the child and get your child to connect with the teacher. Now, advocating for your child. It does start with the teacher, and you have to build relationships. In an ideal world, every teacher would be completely in tune with all of the needs that your child has and would absolutely immediately know when your child is struggling and have the magical way of connecting with your child so that he or she is able to self-correct and go on and maximize their abilities. Kevin, on the teacher level, would the teacher be able to communicate any additional resources? I think, Kristen, that this is a great question, that the teacher, if you go, so when we're creating this learner profile, it allows us to kind of go and share with the teacher what's going on. But if they are reluctant to provide additional services, this is really the beginning of that advocacy process. And so what we want to do is start to be able to build the case that here are my child's needs. And so if they are reluctant, if they're not able to provide those services, what we're doing here is we're building documentation of what your child does well, what does your child need, and then if you're not able to receive resolution at the classroom teacher level, and you've made multiple attempts to communicate with the teacher, At that point, your next step is to move up to the building principal. But we want to make sure for today's purposes that we're talking about how to begin those initial conversations. And I think right now what we're going to do, Robin, and Kristen, this might help kind of think about how do we want to start with that initial process. And so Robin's going to go ahead and we sat down with a teacher and we interviewed a teacher about the initial communication that you would want to make. And we have a brief video to kind of speak to some of the things and kind of get us set. Yeah, we will provide a model suggestion. So hold on one second. Here we go. Robin? I think we want to show the other video, Robin, the one with the teacher interview. Teacher interview. Please,
Kevin, I'm sorry. Which one did you want me to show?
The one where the interview of the teacher.
Oh, okay.
The interview of the teacher. Thanks,
okay.
Robin.
My name is Erica Warren. I teach second grade high ability. I taught 7 years at first grade high ability and then looped with my kids to second grade and stayed in second grade ever since. I have my bachelor's from Indiana State, master's from Ball State with an emphasis in gifted. I think the most effective way to get connected with me is via email. I can get that even if I'm away from school at a training or at a conference. I can also reply quickly during school hours. I always keep a 24-hour policy on emails and phone calls back, though, so I make sure that I get back with that parent within 24 hours. They could try the phone, but I might not be at school that day. The sub may not be taking messages as well as I would have if I would have been there. So I think the email is the best way to get a hold of me. I think that there needs to be some kind of educationally sound reason to meet. Hopefully they've kept some kind of record as to what kind of, documents or procedures they do have in question. And also as far as when they email me, I'd like for them to give me multiple times that would work for them. My schedule at school is very tight, and so hopefully through seeing the times that they can meet and trying to collaborate with when I can meet, we can make something work. I think the best thing they can do is just get connected. I spend so much time working on newsletters, working on my website, working on projects that get sent home. It would just be nice if they could get connected with that first. Make sure they're reading the newsletters, make sure that they do understand, like the Meet the Teacher Night packet that they get as how the school day would be working with their kids, what kind of groups they're going to be getting, what kind of high ability lists they'll be getting and projects they'll be getting. I would like for them to reiterate the vocabulary, the spelling, and the reading focus that they're given at the beginning of the week. In the newsletter, just we'll be working on this, and so that they're reiterating what I'm doing in class. I think another thing is to just complete anything that is taken home. Like my students work in an agenda book. This is due this day. This is due, whenever. And it'd be nice for them to just, initial that every night, see what's going on in class. If I send home a note in there, then they see it. I also have a classroom Twitter account that I use, and it'd be great for them to get connected that way too, and just, retweet me if they have questions, or, connect back to that if they have a question about class. I think it's important that they first understand the identification process. It's a public document. It can be asked for. They need to be aware of how their child was identified to begin with. I also would encourage them to join the LEAP committee. Our high ability program is called the LEAP committee, and we do have parent advocates on that team. And if anyone is interested, they can always join. It's always nice to have a point of view from the parents. They wouldn't have to be present for all of the meetings. They could do something, via the internet to be able to connect with us. They can ask questions from there. They can offer ideas from their perspective about how things are going. But I think it's important first for them to understand how they were identified, how they can stay in the program, what their child must do to maintain, as well as maybe exit procedures. Just be aware.
So, Kathleen, I think you asked a great question, and as we go forward, what we're going to do is you'll see that we have a sample letter that we'll address here in a couple of slides, and we'll move on to the next. We'll move on to the next slide here, where we're talking about starting with a teacher. We know, and I think what you just said, it is helpful to volunteer at the school. It's helpful to support teachers and show that you're being supportive of the teachers. But all of this is to kind of all of this is to be able to set that you are not combative, that you are trying to be collaborative. It doesn't always work. There are times where you might be reaching out in a very engaging and proactive manner, and still it doesn't work. And so, but when you've established this persona, when you've established this body of documentation that you have tried to engage the teacher in a professional way, it gives you more credibility when it's time to move up to the next stage. And that's really what it comes down to, is that you want to be able to show your child how to advocate, but also to be able to have documentation in place for the next part. So before you contact, you want to kind of write down some of the information that you want to talk about. You want to be able to engage with the teacher in a very positive way. And so what we're going to do is, there is the parent sample letter. We have a quick video about the information on the parent sample letter. And I think Robin's going to go ahead and show that, and then we can talk about that sample letter here in just a minute. So Robin, whenever you're ready.
This short video discusses tips for parents to follow when making initial contact with a child's teacher. It is critical to remember the old adage about first impressions, because the manner in which you make this initial contact will set the tone for all future parent-teacher interactions. If you are contacting the teacher to set up a meeting to advocate for your child, then certainly you are not happy. However, it is critical that you do not let your displeasure override your communications. The sample letter you are viewing is simply a draft of how to approach the initial communication. The information in italics is commentary or suggestions about what you need to include. As you can see, this letter establishes that, in your view, the solution requires a collaborative home and school approach and refrains from making accusations. The first paragraph should acknowledge the teacher's hard work. Taking this approach lets the teacher know that you value her or his professionalism and dedication. Also, it immediately removes any sense that you are making accusations about the classroom climate. Again, it is important to remember that you want the teacher to be on your side and to be a collaborative partner. The second paragraph discusses your child's passion for learning. It is an opportunity to share with the teacher your child's strengths. The purpose is to set the tone that you recognize your child's interests in learning, and also allows you to establish the fact that you are advocating for your child. The nurturing tone you established in the previous paragraph allows you to begin laying out the foundation for your meeting without putting the teacher in a defensive stance. The next two paragraphs are where you identify your child's concerns. rather than stating these are your concerns. Again, you are trying to establish that these are issues that your child has brought to you and that you are hoping to meet with the teacher so that all parties can find a solution. Remember, you are trying to help the child learn how to speak up for him or herself. As such, you want to convene a meeting so that everyone can come to common ground. The final paragraph allows you to request a collaborative meeting. Everyone's time is valuable. However, teachers' schedules are not that flexible. If you offer a few times when you can meet, that will enable the teacher to find coverage. The final paragraph again acknowledges the teacher's professional position and removes a sense that you are making accusations. It is important to remember that this letter represents an initial contact. It is understandable that you might be angry and that your child, more than likely, has been expressing his or her concern for a while. However, this will be the first time that your child's teacher is hearing the concerns. It is best to give the teacher the professional benefit of the doubt and believe that a collaborative home-to-school solution can be.
Okay, so that's it. We're trying to find a professional solution there. So Jennifer, I think you raise a great point, and I would kind of say to you, first thing that you need to do is go and identify what are your child's strengths, how does your child learn, where are some of your child's struggles. So, one of the things that you can advocate for perhaps is differentiation of the curriculum, not asking for the teacher to provide more work, but maybe are there different readings? Can your child engage at a deeper level with the content? Or perhaps it's the way that your child demonstrates that he or she is learning the content. So, for instance, are you able to have your child maybe instead of writing a paper every time to produce some type of presentation for the class? Are they able to gather information and create a social media site? So it would first be my first kind of ideas for resources or some strategies would be to sit down with the teacher and see, are there different ways that the child can either engage with the content, or are there different ways that the child can show that he or she is learning the content? And that might be sort of the first thing to begin with, but you can't do any of that until you've identified some of your child's strengths and be able to identify what are going on. So without a more specific communication, Jennifer, or understanding of your child, it's a little difficult to provide some specific ideas. So you and I, you're more than welcome to contact me after this, and we can talk about that. Suzanne, I see that you started to type, but I think I've lost. I don't know that we got your full question there, so feel free to type that in, and we'll address it when it comes up. But you can see from the letter, you're definitely talking about the strengths that your child has. You're acknowledging that the teacher is making an effort and creating a strong classroom environment, but at the same time, in a friendly but firm way, you're saying that my child is struggling in these certain areas. I would like to meet with you so that we can come up with a way for all of us to kind of make a plan for my child so that he or she can engage with the content at his or her ability. So when you finally make that meeting, and I think back to the video, it's important to provide a range of times when you're able to meet. Unfortunately, teachers' school days are not flexible. They get very little time for lunch. They have when they're not engaged with the children directly in the classroom, a lot of time they have school monitoring duties. So they will have a time. So if you give a few different times when you're able to meet with the teacher should be able to make some type of accommodations or coverage. But you can see here some of these tips. Definitely make an appointment. If you see the teacher at the grocery store, let the teacher be at the grocery store. It's okay to say, oh my God, your child loves your class, or maybe there's a time that we can meet. I'm going to send you a few times where we could try and make an appointment. I think where we talk about create a partnership, working as a team, that finding common ground is a really great way to let the teacher know that we are not being combative, that we're trying to problem solve this together. I think listening also is a really important part of the process. You definitely want to be able to attend the meeting with a lot of information and some specific points that you want to articulate, but you have to remember that that teacher typically spends a significant amount of time with your child as well. So so the teacher will have some perspective on what he or she sees your child doing in the classroom or in the hallways or throughout the school. And so it's important for you to listen to what the teacher has to say, not only because they have a perspective, but it shows them that you consider them part of the team. Definitely want to have some type of sense of humor, but following up the last bullet point and the second bullet point, documenting what was said in those meetings, and then following up with the teacher after the meeting. I try not to wait much more than a day after you've had that meeting before you send that follow-up email. We don't have a sample of that. I didn't provide one, but it's very similar to something you might share. It's the same kind of tone that's in the letter where you're trying to make the initial contact. But again, it's important to talk about what we decided, how wonderful it was to take the time, acknowledge that the teacher has a busy day, and that you appreciate the teacher's time to meet. It does seem kind of odd. I mean, that's part of the teacher's responsibility to meet with you, but it's also important that you at least acknowledge that they made that attempt. It's just a good way to go about it. Suzanne, I see your full question now. Are there different suggestions for those whose schools do not have gifted programs or services? So I think so we can ask for resources and differentiation specifically for our child. So what you would want to be able to do is understand what is the curriculum that's being taught, and then ask the teacher, say, okay, my child excels at reading, and my child would like to engage with the information outside of the textbook that's a little deeper, that's a bit more advanced. Or you might want to say ask the teacher, are there other kind of ways for my child to engage with this content? There are also ways to be able to ask the teacher for a menu of options on being able to demonstrate that the learning is taking place. Again, I think we want to think about this not just in the gifted education classroom, but how can we meet the child's needs within the general education classroom as well? And so whether you ask about the child being able to take an online course, sometimes there's wonderful resources like the Khan Academy that's dedicated to a lot of math. There's some other resources out there. So you might be able to sort of offer some alternative suggestions. And Suzanne, again, we can. These are kind of very generic, and sometimes it's difficult to hear and make specific recommendations in a general sense without really knowing much about your child. So we can speak afterwards to kind of let me understand exactly what are some of the situations that your child is struggling with, and how can we work through that to kind of provide you with some suggestions. I'll be more than happy to take that later. As we talked about, in order to be able to follow up, you have to have some documentation during the meeting. So you want to be able to take notes. It's great to take notes. They don't mind you doing that. In fact, I think a lot of times it's really great for you to be in there taking notes, so you can kind of remind the teacher. The teacher doesn't always remember everything either. So it's a great way to sort of say, okay, Ms. Jones, these are the things that we talked about, and I think that it's great that we agreed to these certain things, and so here are some of the things that we agreed to. And so you can see some of the suggestions here that are made. You want to repeat back what was heard to make sure everybody's on the same page. And a great way to say that is to preface by saying, what I hear us saying is such and such. And that way, if you talk about saying, this is what I hear that we're talking about, that phrase, what I hear us saying, are you able to, are we making sure that we're on the same page? I'm sorry, I was just reading Kristen's question. If your school has pull-out programs to address these issues, is it offensive to ask the teacher about them? You mean to ask the teacher about the pull-out programs, Kristen, or do you mean to ask the general education teacher? If you could just clarify about that. But this is something that we have to remember, and I think this is a great point, Kristen, that I think many times that parents often feel is that they're going to offend the teacher. Again, your number one responsibility is to advocate for your child. What I'm trying to help you understand is that is key and the most important goal that you have. What I want you to be able to do is, how do you do that without being offended, without being offensive? It is always okay to ask a teacher about something dealing with your child. It's how do we ask the teacher that can be construed as offensive. And so, Kristen, if we can, depending on your exact question, no, it's not offensive to ask the teacher about something with your child. That is your responsibility as a parent, as your child's really only advocate. And so, so we have to make sure that we are doing that. Asking about the program in place in general. I was also wondering if the teacher will think this creates more work now that the school curriculum is set for the year. Yeah, I mean, I think that they can believe that it is more work for them. But at the same time, you have to be able to begin to negotiate and work with the teacher. And I don't know if I should have used the word negotiate, but you have to be able to collaborate with the teacher. I think that's what I really want, is to collaborate with the teacher to say, you know what, I recognize all the hard work that you're doing. My child engages with content through these ways, and that's why we want to create that learner profile that we talked about at the beginning, because now what you've done is that learner profile helps you to articulate specific educational ideas without using the word bored that somebody mentioned earlier. Teachers don't like to hear that your child is bored in their classroom. But what they do understand is if you are able to say, this is how my child learns, this is what's great about your learning environment, here are some of the things that are not allowing my child to really learn to his or her maximum way. So here are the specific things that we can speak to. And then also, by having your child articulate those, it's really powerful to have a child say to the teacher in an appropriate way, in a supportive, professional way, this is how I learn, this is what I need to be able to do in order to maximize the way that I engage with this content. At the end of the day, you have to make that decision. Am I going to worry about the teacher's feelings, or am I going to worry about my child's feelings? You're always going to put your child's feelings first. We just want you to be able to communicate your child's feelings to the teacher in a very professional, structured way. So I hope that kind of answered the information or the question that you were asking. It is important to follow up, and it's important to provide a thank you note. If the teacher's done a great job, you might want to make sure that you include the principal in that thank you email, saying, "Oh, Ms. Jones, thank you so much. You did a great job, and I really appreciate the time that you took to meet with us." When a teacher does a good job, and you communicate that to the teacher, but also to that teacher's superiors, it really then kind of empowers everybody, and it lets everybody know that you're not just there to cause waves, you're really there to advocate for your child. This question that just popped up, how do you address the response of a teacher that the child needs to adapt to the assignment given? My child sometimes just forgets an assignment because he doesn't like it, doesn't fit their desired style. So I think that's a question or a comment I think that gets presented a lot of times to parents. And so what I would suggest that you do is, again, when you take a look at the history of everything that's been done, there are times where the child needs to write an essay. That's the objective of the lesson, and that is a skill that your child has to have. But when you go back and you look at what is the objective of the lesson, if the objective of the lesson is to be able to convey information, well, there might be alternative ways to convey that information. And so one of the things that I would ask the teacher is, I recognize that my child has to adapt to the assignment given, but instead of adapting to the assignment given, perhaps we can look at what the objectives are and make sure that my child is adapting to the objectives of the lesson, the objectives of the unit. When that's the frame of reference, that we're adapting to the objectives, then if the objective of the lesson is that we have to teach you how to write an essay, well, you know what? Then that might be the appropriate time for your child to adapt to the essay. And then where are the struggles that your child is having with that essay? However, if the objectives are not to teach the child how to write an essay, but something else, and they're trying to measure that by giving the child an essay, then you can kind of insert some suggestions in there on alternative ways to perhaps meet the objectives that the teacher has stated. So I hope that kind of addresses that your question. My child just forgets an assignment. Well, you know, that's kind of a communication issue that you want to make sure that there are communications in place where you're at home holding the child accountable, that the child can't just forget an assignment. You know, so you have to make sure that your child is holding up to his or her end of sort of that social contract that we all make as families, as parents and children and teachers, that general social contract that everybody's going to kind of do their part to move forward, and everybody has to do their part in order for everybody to be effective. So when you are documenting and following up, you can see some of the things that you want to do. You don't want to leave that meeting without kind of understanding what the next steps are, or that the teacher is going to be proactive. Because what we know in the advocacy process is the monitoring is very important. That if the teacher or the school isn't living up to what they agreed upon, you have it in writing, you've documented what was supposed to take place, and now you can kind of say, okay, 2 weeks have gone by, and my child still hasn't received these services, or so you want to be able to make sure that everything's taking place. Again, you don't want to place the burden solely on the school or teacher. So, Kathleen, let me take a look here at your question. Assuming I've politely reached the teacher and had a meeting, but meeting resistance with the process for meeting resistance. What is the process for escalating the situation? How long do I wait, and who do I meet with next? Okay, so this is a great question, and this is kind of that due process. Typically, the next place would be a building administrator. That would be typically the next place. Depending on the way the school is structured, you might want to go either to a department chair, but typically I would politely reach out to the principal. In terms of sort of how long do you wait, I would say you've established a clear timeline of when things are going to happen. So, for instance, maybe you said within 3 weeks we will have identified new reading resources for your child to engage in. 3 weeks come and go, and you haven't received those. You haven't noticed that. I would then reach out to the teacher again and say, our time frame was 3 weeks. I haven't noticed. When do you anticipate this happening? If after that point you haven't kind of reached, or you don't feel that any action is taking place, at that point, it might be a time to kind of go ahead and reach out to the principal and start to kind of say, dear Principal Simpson, these are the things that I met with Ms. Jones in September. These are the things that we agreed upon, and we agreed that these things would happen by such and such a timeline. Could you please follow up with Ms. Jones to find out when she anticipates those services or those agreed upon ideas to be implemented. I've noticed that they're not happening. Any support that you can provide would be greatly appreciated. Something like that, reaching out to the principal, letting the principal know what was agreed upon and the timeline when things were agreed upon, and then sort of asking the principal to follow up with that teacher for you. I think that's sort of a nice transition to find out what's going on. And from there, we then would have to start talking about other ways to start then communicating with the school and with the principal. But still, you would want to maintain that diplomatic type approach, that proactive and that team-building kind of approach. So I hope, Kathleen, that answered your question. I think right now, we have about 10 minutes or so for any questions that you might have. Please feel free to, type and send your questions. It's a difficult process. I feel that parents typically are at a significant disadvantage. In my research, I've done research with parents who have advanced degrees even, PhDs, master's degrees, and when they walk into those advocacy meetings or they walk into a meeting with a teacher, all of a sudden these highly educated, highly intelligent people suddenly don't know a thing. And they don't know the education language, they don't know the terminology, they don't know the rules and the policies that are in place. And what they do is they inherently trust the school system, trust the school teacher, trust the principal, that the school officials and professionals are going to provide the necessary services for the children. And many times the school system does. And that trust is supported, but sometimes it's not. And that trust then starts to erode as parents they have to then start to educate themselves on the policies and procedures, and it becomes very difficult and sometimes disheartening. Holly wrote, my son attends a private, well-respected school. However, there's no gifted program. I'm trying to find something to challenge my son, but it's very difficult. I feel lost. And Holly, I think what you've said kind of is where a lot of teachers are. And I would kind of like, as I suggested or reached out to a couple of the other parents here, it's hard for me to provide a specific answer to your child or to your situation without knowing more about it. So I'm more than happy to find a time when we can communicate individually. Let me know exactly where some of your child's struggles are, and I can help you through that process. Kathleen, I think, asks a great question, or raises a great point, where there are principals who sort of don't have the mindset to support gifted students at the same level that many other people do, and so going to the PTA, talking to or pulling resources that NAGC has and sort of sharing those ideas, sharing ideas that you learn from NAGC. Administrators and principals don't like it if you just give them materials. They want to hear some ideas. They don't necessarily want to read the ideas. Either by manner or research. So, I think calling the superintendent, you have to work your way up the chain. You have to be able to document that you've tried to communicate with the principal, and it is a lengthy process. Advocating for your child in the school system, when your child's needs aren't being met, it's a long process. And one of the things that I find is difficult for parents, and me myself. I wear two hats. I'm a parent and I'm a teacher, and so when I go into these classrooms, I have to put on my parent hat. I can't put on my teacher hat because I'm advocating for my child. And as parents, when my child has a cold, I go to the drugstore, I get some antihistamine, and I can treat my child's cold. Or my child, God forbid, breaks his leg or her leg, I take him to the doctor, they put a cast on it, and I can see something being taken care of, and it's quick. But sometimes the advocacy process is more like moving something through Congress, trying to get a bill passed, and that it's a matter of documentation, working through the bureaucracy, and it's hard to deal with bureaucracy when we're talking about our children. So I agree with you, Kathleen, that immediately calling the superintendent, it is adversarial. You have to be able to document that you've worked at these previous places, at these lower levels, and be able to offer suggestions on what can happen, and keep fighting it, keep pushing it. I shouldn't use the word fighting. Keep pushing it, keep advocating, keep at it. So you have to show persistence, because in many instances, unfortunately, you won't receive the services that your child needs at the first request. Many times, I don't know what many is, but there are times where you have to keep and be persistent. And that in and of itself is modeling modeling advocacy strategies for your child. Let's see here. Assuming I've politely reached out. Is there a way to find out the resources available in the school district? Typically, you should be able to go to the school district website and find, at the very least, you should be able to reach out to the person in charge of special education. A lot of times that's where gifted education services are provided. If you don't see a district-level gifted services or somebody who's in charge of gifted education for the whole district. So if you're looking, go to the school's website and start there with the person in charge of special education. I haven't shared any information. My son is 3.5 years older than her. Okay, so I haven't shared any information on my daughter. My son is 3.5 older than her, and he was a preemie, but is not gifted, although he's very smart. Is there something I should be talking to my daughter about at this age? I was afraid she might taunt her brother. I thought I'd handle it with the school on my own for now to take actions. I think that we have to recognize that the identification process of giftedness is a messy process. And while we try to make it precise, it isn't precise. And so one of the things that you can present is that you have to make your own decision. I don't know your children. That's hard for me to provide some specific counseling, but you do need to kind of think about how do you want to present this information with your daughter and with your son. And I think, I don't think there's anything wrong with creating a learner profile for all your children, regardless of whether or not they're gifted, and make sure that all your children know what their strengths are and how they learn and how to advocate for themselves. I think that that's an important process. To what extent you exactly share the information, that has to be a family decision. And I just, without knowing more of the family dynamics within your family, I don't know that I can comfortably share with you exactly how to handle that. But I do think that you should have both of your children create learner profiles and understand their own strengths. How can a school district be proactive, support parents, and help parents see that they are aware of the students? Well, I think this is a great question, Kelly, that communication, that the school system has to be able to communicate with parents everything that's going on and talk about be transparent. That's really what parents are looking for, is transparency. They feel that when they go in to advocate, as we mentioned earlier, that they're at a distinct disadvantage. And they don't want to feel that they're at a disadvantage because they love their child. Parents have to remember how much parents love their children and just the hopes and the aspirations that they have for that child. I mean, that's why that question on the learner profile for the parent about what do you want for your child 25 years from now is a really powerful question when you stop and you sit down and you really think about what you want for your child 25 years from now. But that's why schools have to be kind of transparent about what kind of services that they're providing. And so I think that that's kind of the way to do it, just to be open, share websites, share through a website or through social media or constant contact with the parents. So the different things that we're doing to meet students of all ability levels. Suggestions to this: what should one do when the standard path is too slow? In Kentucky, yes, Jed, I know. I used to teach in Kentucky, and in Kentucky, to get the programs, they don't start until 4th grade. And so, I don't know exactly, Jed, where you live. Kentucky, and one of the people that I would reach out to is Julia Roberts at Western Kentucky University to talk to you of exactly how to handle what's going on. They can provide services younger than 4th grade. And so I would suggest that you reach out to Dr. Julia Roberts, not the Hollywood Julia Roberts, the famous, awesome Julia Roberts who's at Western Kentucky. And she would be a wonderful resource for you. They have a Center for Gifted Studies there. That would be a wonderful place. But, you need to go in. If they're not going to provide services, specific gifted education services, you do want to be able to go into the teacher and talk about these are my child's strengths. How are we going to meet the strengths of this child prior to receiving gifted services? What can we do in the classroom to differentiate services? Let's see, Kristen, speaking more about content of the Board of Ed so I could be more aware of the programs in place. She said, I still think, Kristen, that if you want to understand really the services that are in place, I would still start with not necessarily let's make sure we're talking about the same kind of language here. When we talk about the Board of Education, I typically refer to the people who are elected. I would think like the central office folks is where I would start, and I would feel completely comfortable with the central office folks as they're really the day-to-day operators, whereas the Board of Education is kind of the overseer of what's going on. Lynette, thank you for sharing the contact information. That's wonderful. Paul, Board of Ed, thanks. I couldn't find it. I think we have all of the questions answered, and I think we're kind of maybe out of our time. My information is right there on the screen, and please, anybody feel comfortable, when everybody feel comfortable contacting me, and it's been a wonderful opportunity to share this information with y'all.
Kevin, thank you so much. This was really terrific, chock full of information. And thanks, everyone, for your great questions. I apologize again for the links. I think that I have fixed them all, but I will ensure that they're all working before I close out the meeting today. And you can either hang on and for the links, or else you can view them and download them in the archived webinar, which will be immediately in your My Webinars link after the program. So thank you again, Kevin. This was terrific.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay.
All right.
All right, everyone. You can disconnect. Okay.
All right.
Thanks again.
Thank you, Robin. Do we need to follow up?
I'll give you a call later.
Okay, sounds great.
All right.
Right.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.